eye trip helps you out. All right, gang. We're ready to go here. I'm going to have, you'll notice Mr. Hava is going to be handing out here in a second a slide to you. We're going to use this at the end of our period today. Oh, sorry, I put them over there. Those are the extra ones. We're going to use this at the end, so you're going to want to look at it. I just want to make sure that you have it so we can move efficiently, but you can just set it aside for now. We'll deal with it at the end of our class. This topic that we're about to get into today is, of everything in the class, probably the thing that I'm the most passionate about. I put this quote up here from my personal hero. I got to meet this individual 1 year before he died, which was one of the coolest things that I've ever had in my life. His name is Norm Borlaug, Dr. Norm Borlaug. If you were at graduation last year and you heard my commencement address, it was about Norm Borlaug. I think what he's done is more significant than anyone else who's ever lived in human history has done. Our greenhouse is dedicated to him. In fact, when he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970, the commissioner of the Nobel Prize said, more than any other person in his age, Dr. Borlaug has done more to provide bread for a starving world. He's credited with saving over 1 billion lives from starvation. I can't think of hardly anyone else in history who you can say saved 1 billion people. I don't think there's anybody who's even close, not even on the same level. So what Dr. Borlaug done is extremely significant. A quote from his writings, his memoirs, it said, "Food is a moral right for all who are born into this world." Well, we're going to talk about this and think about it as we get into the lecture for today. I want you to think about your context and your vantage point for looking at this topic are two things. The number of people on the planet and that trend, which is going to be a lot more people in the future, and land use decisions. Yesterday in our class time when we were doing concept mapping, hopefully everyone got to a point where the way the decisions are made about how to use land on this planet forever into the past and probably forever into the future is the worldview that the people who are making the decisions have, which guides the way that they conduct their economies, and the economies directly are probably the thing that's affecting land use the most. So human population and land use is really key. Here are the key learning targets. This is from all the modules, all the assigned reading in the text. We're going to look very briefly at human nutritional requirements. There's a few key terms that we got to brush over. Not a lot of nutrition. I'd love to do more, but we're going to keep it surface level. Then we're going to look at this thing called the Green Revolution that follows the next three, modern large-scale agriculture methodology, intensification of agriculture. We're going to look at genetic alteration, genetic modified organisms, more on that in the lab in the future. And then we're going to talk about some of the changes that will be part of the future solutions for agriculture. So, alternative techniques to help again. I want to start out with this. I'm going to show, let me start. I had my order wrong. We're going to talk about nutritional needs for our planet first. Is everybody with me? I feel a weird sense that I only have about 25% of the group. Are people here? We're good? Snow day. It's a tough day. We got 35 minutes of time. We're going to get through this. All right. Nutritional needs. Every the word malnutrition, you probably associate it with one of these terms, but not the other. So we're going to talk about the subcategory of terms. Malnutrition means you're deficient in your diet, or an individual population is deficient in their diet for any reason. It could be the overconsumption of certain nutrients that could result in some sorts of imbalances or deficiencies. It's usually thought of in terms of calories. So it could be both too much calories or too little calories. So the subcategories that go with that is undernutrition, which is maybe the thing you usually think of when you think of malnutrition. Not enough calories in the diet, not enough vitamins in the diet. It results in all kinds of health problems. That is referred to as undernutrition. But there's another problem, and it's an emerging problem. This has not been a problem that's been an issue for history, but it's overnutrition. The overconsumption of certain calories or nutrients that also result in health effects. Normally you think, okay, undernutrition or malnutrition, it's really severe. People are dying from it. Overnutrition is also very severe. In the United States, the biggest reason that the number one fate is from heart disease. Heart disease is most driven by obesity and overweight and overconsumption of calories. Things like diabetes associated in there as well. So the number one health crisis in the United States, and all health experts will probably agree, is the overconsumption of nutrients. So if you think that malnourishment is not a problem in this country, you're wrong. It's a huge problem in this country. It's a huge problem globally. So when we think about malnourishment, it's not just something that's dealt in one geography, it's dealt with everywhere. So I like these considerations. Which populations are most likely to be affected, but also for what reasons? So if you can't have access to food, you're obviously going to be malnourished. If you can grow really good food and you can eat and have enough calories, but that food doesn't have all the vitamins you need, you probably are also going to end up being malnourished. If cheap foods that are high in calories and not particularly nutritious are available, you're probably going to overconsume and have an overconsumption. So when we think about malnourishment and this problem globally, we're going to think about, well, how does that relate to the agricultural production system and how can it impact nutrition for human populations? This is a problem we have to solve everywhere. Here are two short videos. The first one is the one that we're going to watch, which is on the left. It's a little bit difficult to see from your position, and I'm going to kind of talk about it as it plays. It's really short. This shows the Amazon rainforest, which we've studied a few times before in this class, and rates of deforestation in 1 hectare of land. The ominous music, probably not inappropriate. This is one of the areas that's the most biodiverse places in the world. Highest number of species, high level of productivity, lots of rain, lots of access to sunlight. It's near the equator. In the right corner, you can kind of see the dates. This is the year 1990 right now. It's a time lapse. Here is coming up on the year 2000. It runs up to the year 2010. I'm going to try to pause it at that stage. Oh, dang it. I hit the wrong button. Let me pause it here. A few more years into it. No. Curses. In this area, because of deforestation, which has occurred because they're trying to divert rainforest land to be used for agricultural production, it looks like a desert. We just took the most biodiverse place in the world and made it one of the least biodiverse places. We haven't altered the climate and weather in this area, but through deforestation, we've caused a huge amount of harm to this ecosystem, and it's because of agricultural production. Here's the other side of the coin. I'm going to show this video. It's a little bit hard to watch, especially for me. Hopefully it's not too hard for you to watch. It's short. This is showing the famine in Somalia in the year 2017, which is a problem that continues on to this day that we're at in January of 2019.
فكرة البشي اللي قصوا بالبشي كل الطلاب الصغيرة اللي هذا آخر في الجود اللي يصير عليه وناس طبعا مخاطر وزوج الرجال وكانوا معنا الهدية وتفارقها يبري وبري لا تريد كهذا
Okay, so in this area, by the way, this famine has occurred because crops have failed for all kinds of different reasons. But the lower Swivl area that he's referred to, about 2/3 of the people are at risk of dying of starvation this year. So if you look at this room, 2 out of every 3 people dying, and not just falling over dead like from a heart attack or a car accident, which isn't not tragic, but it's one of the worst fates for anybody who could ever be born, is to die of starvation. Watching every part of your body slowly fail until you eventually die, mothers watching children, that kind of thing, that is the face of famine. It's something that's easy to hide from. It's very extreme, and you can see different examples of it. The video is not as, it doesn't paint it as extreme as what it seems like to witness in person, but it's a big thing. So when we think about agriculture production, we have a stress on the land, but colossal demand. No one wants to see people die of starvation. No one wants to see famine. The need for agriculture and providing nutrition globally, that is a key thing. I have another short video that I want to show, and it's more of a data package than a video, honestly. This is about food security, and the video from National Geographic, produced in 2009, is talking about the need to meet the demands of a growing population in the year 2050, where the population is expected to be at 9 billion. At the year 2100, the population could be at 11 billion. So we have a huge demand. Here are the questions that I want you to think about as you watch. What are some of the major obstacles standing in the way of food security right here? And what are some of the solutions? How would that look different in the United States than where it might globally? Short video. Here we go. All right, so we need to think we're going to address all the parts of and we're going to look at some other ancillary data. But some of the parts that are important are the need for food, the quantity of food, and the nutrition is huge. And some of the food that's produced, unfortunately, doesn't go into feeding people. And so we have all kinds of issues that are also associated with the land use decisions. So here's where we put the 2 lenses that we talked about at the beginning that we need to think about this. The vantage points is population and land use decisions. Let's look at the land component here. Clicked out of it. Let's look at the land use. This is a key graphic to interpret. I want to take a little time to digest what's going on here and understand it in full. So give your attention up here and check out what we're talking about. Everything in white is the total surface area of the globe. So the continents and the oceans have been removed, but as a proportional pie graph, that's the total amount of space that's available on land. On all of Earth, I mean. Over here, this is forests, mountains, deserts, that gray portion. These are areas that aren't very productive. They're not particularly productive. There's really no opportunity to move agricultural production into these areas because they're places like deserts at the top of mountains, oceans, etc. So of all the land, we just don't have, even though there's a huge portion here, our opportunity for moving agricultural production to those lands, there is no opportunity. The next column I want to look at is the one all the way here on the right. This is showing the ways that we're using land for other purposes, things like cities, for rural housing and businesses, industrial places, for planted forests and timber production, for mining, mineral production, roads, etc., other parts of infrastructure. The main message here, this area up here is erosion, area that's been lost due to certain reasons and infrastructure creation. But all of these small circles together are much smaller than the circles that are in the middle in green. So most of the land that we're using for agricultural production, it's a huge amount of space. So when you think of all the other human activities, those pale in comparison to the amount of land that we're using for crop and food production. Here's the amount for pasture land. So that's the land that's associated with raising stock, cattle, pork, etc. Here is the crop land, the amount of land that's used to grow crops. From that video that you just saw, and this is an important piece of data, about 1/3 of it, 38% of all crops that go onto people's dinner plates, that's going into the mouths of animals as well. So here's this portion for animal production, and then you can think of 1/3 of this also being used to support animal production. We look at use, the biggest portion is used for animal production. Everybody feel good with that? Great. The opportunity for expanding land is not that much. At the beginning, we started out talking about Norm Borlaug, and in the past, the Industrial Revolution was 10,000 years ago. As a human society, this is not the first time we face challenges of global food production. How have we done it in the past? The way we've done it in the most recent era is probably the way that's the most applicable. We've expanded crop production and food availability in the last 50 years by a pretty large quantity, but only improved it by 25%. The other quote from that video, which was the opening part, is we're going to need to double the food production from the year 2010 to the year 2050. So we only improved it 25% in a 30-year span. In another 40-year span, we have to double it. So the future demand is much higher, and it's because of growing populations most primarily. Here are 6 pillars of this thing called the Green Revolution. This is key terminology. All 6 of these are connected. So I don't want you to think about these in individual silos. It's part of a suite of technologies that will all leverage at the same time, that all had a major and significant impact on the amount of crop production globally in the world. The first is monocropping. Monocropping is an agricultural production practice where you're only planting one type of plant on a land at a time. Why is this such an advantage? Well, part is it improves the efficiency for the farmers and the workers who work on that land. If you only plant at one time of year, if you only have to harvest at one time of year, if you only have to have one type of machinery that costs a lot of money that you can use on that land, suddenly improve the amount that you can do with that given land because you've improved the efficiency. You can pack more plants into a given space. You can treat them all in the same way, and it's very easy. And so the amount of production on the land went up in a dramatic fashion, and that was just because of this new technique, and that is called monocropping. In the United States, where industrial farm practices are really common, if you drive anywhere in the summer, you see fields and fields of corn only, and then soybeans only. If you go across California, you'll see places where they grow one type of tomato variety only. That monocropping has primarily improved the efficiencies and allowed economies of scale to take place. So if you don't know economies of scale, that means you can do, if you do the same thing, you can do more than you used to do than if you try to do a diverse. So that's what we're talking about here with crops. The next is irrigation, which is not a brand new idea, but innovation that's happening in irrigation is constantly being improved over time. So we've been doing irrigation for an extremely long time. This is a picture from western Kansas, which is nearby where I grew up in eastern Colorado. And the parts that are in brown is what the native ecosystem basically looks like. It's short grassland prairie, not very productive. Look at the level of primary productivity coming out of these areas in green. It's because this environment the productivity is limited by the availability of precipitation. If you augment the amount of water by adding irrigation, suddenly it's highly productive. These areas are getting 5, 6, 10 times more yield than they would get grown on rainfall alone, and it's because of the advent and techniques related to irrigation. This is center pivot irrigation using aquifers. The square blocks is flood irrigation, 2 different types, but it's supplementing the amount of water. The next, which was primarily the focus of Dr. Borlaug's work, and it remains a huge opportunity because as a scientific body, we actually don't know that much about biological. In the past, we would have to wait an amount of time and try to find wild crops that were pretty good, but through artificial selection, you're able to subject certain plants to selective pressures and find the ones that are good. So you're improving, you're decreasing the amount of time for evolution to occur, and then implementing those genetics and leveraging those genetics. This has been transformative. This is probably the technique that has done the most in the last 50 years. So in orange here, this shows the baseline production. And in the green shows what's been supplemented in terms of yield, the amount of crops that you get from a piece of land through increased genetics. So we've almost doubled the crop production in some areas due to genetic increases alone. That's only been done in a few key crops, mini crops that have been studied. 3 more. I know this is a lot of material. We have some things. I've got a breakout session that we're going to get to in a second, but we have a few more things we're going to conquer. These go with the previous 3. The next is fertilizer. This is an image I took while I was in graduate school in Nebraska, and it was looking at the supplement, a 15% supplement of nitrogen on certain corn inbreds. But because of biogeochemical cycle studies that we're familiar with, we know that plant productivity requires critical micronutrients in order to be productive. Things like phosphorus, nitrogen, calcium, magnesium. If you provide and supplement the amount of nutrients that are in an area, you can dramatically improve the production. Look at just my one example. These are all the exact same variety of corn grown on the exact same spaces and land. So not differences in climate, not differences in amount of rain, only in the amount of nitrogen that is available. These corn inbreds have no nitrogen, and these have supplemental nitrogen added. The ears of corn are much longer. The kernels on the corn are much higher. This is about doubling the yield, or a third increase in the yield just by nutrients. Next, pesticide use. Pests have they can decimate crops. High pest pressure can have the influence of almost 100% of crop losses, crop failure. If you read history, you hear a lot about plagues, and plagues being the reason for famines. The Irish potato famine was due to pest pressure and disease, and it wiped out the entire crop. 6 million people died of starvation. So pest pressure is a huge problem that farmers have to solve. The last one, and I really like the way this is bookended here, mechanization, which is the utilization of engineered tools, things like tractors, things like specialized equipment that allows cleaning of grain, things like in dairies, the automated pumping. That goes a lot with monocropping. Both of these together, monocropping and mechanization together, have allowed for most of the others. So you need tractors to apply pesticide. You need ways to implement fertilizer. You need technology for irrigation. So those things together have increased the efficiency, and it's been pretty transformative. There's probably not a lot of more opportunity for engineered solutions, but it's something that we're still looking at. Here are some of the key, and there are more. This is not a list. But while we solve the problem to reduce the amount of famine in certain areas, certainly by improving crop production, one of the unfortunate detriments has been we've caused a lot of damage to the environment. Here are some of the key ones. Monocropping obviously has decreased biodiversity. It's also created food deserts for wildlife. We've made areas where there used to be a lot of organisms, now there's only one. Irrigation depletes freshwater resources. Here's a fact that we'll talk about in our next lecture and when we look at water availability, but you should have it in your mind now. The amount of water that you consume in a day. 1,000 times that quantity of water is used to produce the food that you eat in a day. So irrigation and the usage of water in agriculture is huge strain on the environment. Genetic improvements have made farmers reliant on a few of the best technologies that have been invented. It's a critical loss of biodiversity. It also puts us at risk in case the environment changes. Fertilizer runoff. We'll talk about this a lot when we look at pesticide use, but it causes a lot of harm. It's a toxic pollutant and it causes a lot of damage to terrestrial and especially aquatic ecosystems. Pesticides, you know a lot about, i.e. silent spring. There are many adverse effects associated with pesticides. Good opportunities. It's allowed to improvement of crop production, but it's caused a lot of damage in the environment. Mechanization, it's increased the rate and the scale that we cause damage in the environment because it's gigantic machinery, primarily. Everybody take a quick, deep breath. Whoo! We got 15 minutes left. We're going to conquer a few more key things. Where will we be able to solve this problem and feed 9 billion population or feed an 11 billion population? We know the population is going to grow. What level of satisfaction do we have as a human society if we make it to 11 billion, but 2 billion die of starvation? It's not a good fate. It's a giant problem that we have to solve. This slide is my most important slide for today. I have 5 ways I want to talk about improved food security and as we think and we're forward looking about populations. The first is we have to freeze the footprint of agriculture at this moment. We can no longer divert other types of land to agricultural production. We've used all the good productive land that is there. If we do more, it causes damage to things like rainforests, which are already at a critical threshold at this moment now. Deserts and converting those to crop or low productive areas, it uses too much water. The agriculture footprint, decisions must be made by decision makers and individuals that we can no longer expand agricultural production. That is key. Next, we have to grow more in the areas that we're using now. That probably comes a lot through genetic techniques like what we've seen before, but it also uses the application of scientific knowledge in a whole myriad of ways. Engineered solution like high precision tools for farming and fertilizer irrigation usage. It also, so we're interacting and looking at sustainable solutions that exist now. What are the best practices that can be leveraged and rolled out into different areas of the world? So we have to find more ways to extract from the areas that we have now. If we can't expand, but we need to produce more, then that obviously we have to do more with what we're already doing. Number 3, we have to use resources more efficiently. So the answer also cannot be, well, we'll just use more. Earth is a closed system in terms of matter. We cannot get more fresh water. We can't get more nitrogen and phosphorus. The amount we have now is how much we have. If we ruin what we have now, it goes. We have to improve the efficiency here, and that probably comes from all sorts of techniques. It's, again, science. Number 4. This is an opportunity that is not talked about very often. It hasn't been talked about much in the past, but it will be talked about a lot in your lifetime, and that's shifting diets. The ecological footprint of people in the United States is extraordinarily high. It's the highest in the world. Part of that is because of the cars we drive and the clothes we wear, but it's mostly because of the way that we eat. High consumption of meat. The earth will not be able to support 9 billion, 11 billion people who eat like the way that you eat now. Diets will have to shift in meaningful ways, and we'll have to figure out ways to grow less intensive meat diets in order to improve the amount of food production. This makes sense because of where animals are on the trophic level. So we have losses all around. If we're using the energy on lower parts of the trophic system, then obviously we're leveraging the available energy in a better way. The last one is reducing waste. I love the facts that are put underneath this. 25% of what we're making now is just lost. In the United States, a lot of times that means I didn't finish everything that was in the refrigerator and it spoiled and I threw it away. In poorer countries, that means I wasn't able to harvest because I didn't have the right machinery in place, or I couldn't get there, or there was a civil war and crops rotted in the field, or other infrastructure solutions didn't allow me to take my food and get it to people who wanted to eat that food. But it's a huge problem. It's a global problem. It's not a developing world problem. It's a problem everywhere. Food waste is the stupidest problem that exists on our planet. I want to show you're not responsible for anything. I'm going to browse through a couple really quick slides here that just show you some of the images of technology. We're at the advent of technology in food production. Although the agricultural revolution was 10,000 years ago, almost all the innovation has happened in the last couple decades. This shows a gentleman at the seed bank where they're looking at all kinds of genetic and using electron microscopes and key molecular techniques to find the best wheat germplasm that exists on the planet. This is high-tech stuff. This isn't like old MacDonald out in the farm. This is the best technology that exists on our planet, and it's being used to find transformative revolutions in food production. Here's another technique that's used. This shows a big robot here. This is a thing called seed chipper, and what this does is it takes a small section of a seed, like right here, and it cuts it out, and you sequence the genome. Then you can also plant that same plant in the field and grow it up and see what the plant looks like. Why is this important? Food production and global food security is a time-sensitive issue. It has to be solved by the year 2050. Traditional breeding practices take about 10 years. Now you can do the same practices in 18 months with a technology like this. It speeds it up. It allows us to find key gains in genetic varieties as quick as possible. This shows a problem related to citrus greening. The price of citrus fruits have quadrupled in my lifetime. There's a big challenge because of this issue. So we don't pesticides that cause a lot of harm in the environment, but we can find other methodologies, like maybe the plants can resist the pests themselves. This is high-tech stuff. I just like these pictures because it shows you the technology related to food production. This is a revolution, and it's happening right now in real time. This is a field where I was studying. This was part of the Water Efficiency Maize for Africa project, which was a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, trying to find key genetics that can improve water efficiency use of plants and making sure subsistence farmers in Africa have access to that technology royalty-free. So this was just some of the work that I was doing previously before I came to the school. The work was published in 2014. I didn't put a key. I missed my little star on this slide, but there should be one here. We're going to talk about a lot of the techniques that are trying to overcome the challenge that exists with environmental damage and land use decisions, and at the same time improve the amount of production. So here we have two of the techniques. In laboratory next week, we're going to deal with about 4 more. Intercropping. Improving the diversity by putting more crops together with one another. In order for that to happen, we have to invent new machines that will allow for that to be done efficiently. It's not done now, even though people know it's a good idea, because we don't have the technology in place. Another is integrated pest management, which is a whole suite of tools. Crop rotation, so that you're balancing and you're buffering the zone where crops are, so the pests don't get too large and you don't have things like plagues. Intercropping, which I just mentioned, making pest-resistant varieties, which is genetic. Like I showed in the previous slides, the citrus screening one is a great example. Creating habitats for predators. If you have a key insect that's causing harm to crops, and then you put bats around, and bats love to eat those insects, you're leveraging native ecology to solve a human problem, working with nature instead of against nature. And the last, limiting the use of pesticides so we stop causing irreparable harm and increasing toxicity in the environment. I like this graphic. It's from the book. This doesn't have, I don't have like a study behind it, but the trend is true. Without integrated pest management, the application of pesticides is really high. If you think about Silent Spring, we know what some of the negative outcomes associated with high pesticide use look like. It's not a good state. If you use integrated pest management, it's lower. But here's the key. At the same time, you improve the yield. Because many of these techniques don't just reduce the amount of pesticide, but they also increase the opportunity to improve production on those lands. So it's better efficiency. It's a good thing. I want to talk very quickly about aquaculture and what I'll call the blue revolution, or what people call the blue revolution, and that's related to fish production. What's amazing is, in this area there's a huge opportunity. Most where fishing and aquaculture happens is in developing nations. So there's a lot of ripe opportunity in places where agriculture and food production revolutions have not happened before. This is a place where it could happen in the future. This shows a really great picture of people fishing prawn near Indonesia. Goes with this graphic. I love these infographics. Let's take it in together. Most of where aquaculture takes place is in Southeast Asia and places like India. Amazing thing. That's where most of the population increases are occurring already. So they're providing for their populations through this new technique. But you can see in most of this map, not a lot going on. So that means the future opportunity is huge. Here's what it looks like in the past. This graphic, let me walk through it. This is the year 1950 here. This is the year 2011. So we have growth. Everything in gray is from fishing. So the amount of fish provided to the food production system by fishing. We know there are issues associated with fishing. All kinds of negative externalities. Here is aquaculture. This light blue is Asia. So we've almost doubled the amount of fish available for our food production system through aquaculture, but in Asia alone. Only in a few small places. Look at this. This dark blue is the rest of the world. So we can improve the amount of food production if we can use some of these same techniques, but in other areas. So this is a farming of fish. Here's the other graph that I really like. Shifting diets is a big part of solving. This is the last slide, by the way, and then we're going to do a breakout, so stay with me. But this shows the amount of inputs, essentially, that are needed to make 1 pound of meat. You can see it's the highest for cattle. And this is pork. And hogs. And then this is chicken. Fish require 1/6 of the inputs of what beef looks like. So when we think about the amount of strain and the amount of crops and pasture land that goes into raising animals, most of that is producing animals that don't efficiently use all of the material. So when we think about shifting diets, there's a huge opportunity at this moment now for aquaculture. All right, I'm ready for the next thing here. Does anybody have any questions really quick about that? This is a very dense topic, and it's a snow day. Don't get lost. This is all very important stuff. It'll come up a lot. Here's what I want. Everybody has a slide. You can put away everything else that you have for the day, but know this. I'm not going to let you leave early, and you're going to need to keep your graph for future reference in this class. Everyone in this room has a different graphic. If you don't have one, Mr. Havel will get you one. The first thing I need you to do is look at your graphic. This graphic gives you some data that's related to food security globally at this moment now in history. I want you to look at your data set, and then you're going to tell somebody else what that data means. Here's the contingency. You can't tell the person who's sitting next to you or the person who's 2 away from you. You have to go find someone else. So look at your data and then share with 3 people what does that data tell you? Ready? Hit it.